This is Faithless by Joyce Carol Oates. 1. Last time my mother, Cornelia Nissenbaum, and her sister Constance saw their mother was the day before she vanished from their lives forever. April 11th, 1923. It was a rainy, misty morning. They'd been searching for their mother because something was wrong in the household. She hadn't come downstairs to prepare breakfast, so there wasn't anything for them except what their father gave them, glutinous oatmeal from the previous morning, hastily reheated on the stove, sticking to the bottom of the pan and tasting of scorch. Their father, it seemed strange to them, smiling but not seeing in that way of his, like Reverend Diekman, too fierce in his pulpit Sunday mornings, intoning the word of God. His eyes were threaded with blood. His face was still pale from the winter, but flushed, mottled. In those days he was a handsome man, but stern-looking and severe. Gray, grizzled side whiskers and a spade-shaped beard, coarse and grizzled too with gray, but thick, springy, sleek black hair brushed back from his forehead in a crest. The sisters were fearful of their father, without their mother to mediate among them. It was as if none of them knew who they were without her. Connie chewed her lip and worked up her nerve to ask where was Mama. And their father said, hitching up his suspenders on his way outside, "Your mother's where you'll find her." The sisters watched their father cross the mud-puddled yard to where a crew of hired men was waiting in the doorway of the big barn. It was rye planting season. Always in spring, in the Chautauqua Valley, there was worry about rain. Too much rain and the seed would be washed away or rot in the soil before it could sprout. My mother Cornelia would grow to adulthood thinking how blessings and curses fell from the sky with equal authority, like hard-pelting rain. There was God, who set the world in motion, and who intervened sometimes in the affairs of men for reasons no one would know. If you lived on a farm, there was weather, always weather. Every morning was weather, every evening at sundown, calculating the next days. The sky's moods meant too much. Always casting your glance upward, outward, your heart set to quicken. That morning, the sisters would never forget that morning. We knew something was wrong. We thought Mama was sick. The night before, having heard what exactly? Voices. Voices mixed with dreams in the wind. On that farm at the brink of a 10-mile descent into the Chautauqua River, it was always windy. On the worst days, the wind could literally suck your breath away, like a ghost, a goblin. An invisible being pushed up close beside you, sometimes even inside the house, even in your bed, pushing his mouth or muzzle to yours and sucking out the breath. Connie thought Nelia was silly, a silly baby to believe such. She was 8 years old and skeptical-minded, yet maybe she believed it too, liking to scare herself, the way you could almost tickle yourself with some wild thoughts. Connie was always famished, and after that morning would be famished for years, sat at the oilcloth-covered table and ate the oatmeal her father had spooned out for her, devoured it, scorched clots and all, her head of fair frizzy braids lowered and her jaws working quickly. Oatmeal sweetened with top milk at the very edge of turning sour, and coarse brown sugar. Nelia, who was fretting, wasn't able to swallow down more than a spoon or two of hers, so Connie devoured that too. She would remember that part of the oatmeal was hot enough to burn her tongue, other parts were icebox cold. She would remember that it was all delicious. The girls washed their dishes in the cold water sink, at the oatmeal pan soaking scummy soap suds. It was time for Connie to leave for school, but both knew she could not go, not today. She could not leave to walk 2 miles to the school without feeling that something was wrong, nor could she leave her little sister behind. Though Amelia snuffled and wiped her nose on both her hands, Connie cuffed her on the shoulder and scolded, "Piggy, piggy!" That's a habit of their mothers when they did something that was only mildly disgusting. Connie led the way upstairs to the big bedroom at the front of the house. It was Mama and Papa's room, and if they were forbidden to enter unless specifically invited. For instance, if the door was open and Mama was cleaning inside, changing bedclothes, so she'd call out, "Come in, girls," smiling in her happy mood so it was all right and they would not be scolded. "Come in, give me a hand," which turned into a game, shaking out sheets, fluffing out pillowcases to stuff heavy goose feather pillows inside. Mama and Connie and Nelia laughing together. But this morning, the door was shut. There was no sound of Mommy inside. Connie dared to turn the doorknob, push the door open slowly, and they saw, yes, to their surprise, there was their mother lying on top of the unmade bed, partly dressed, wrapped in an afghan. My God, it was scary to see Mama like that, lying down at such an hour of the morning. Mama, who was so brisk and capable, who routed them out of bed if they lingered. Mama with little patience for Connie's lazy tricks, as she called them, or for Nelia's sniffles, tummy aches, and baby fears. "Mama?" Connie's voice was cracked. "Mama?" Nelia whimpered. The mother groaned and flung an arm across one of the pillows lying crooked beside her. She was breathing hard, like a winded horse, her chest rising and falling so you could see it, and her head was flung back on a pillow. She placed a wetted cloth across her eyes, mask-like, so half her face was hidden. Her dark blonde hair was disheveled, unplaited, coarse and lusterless as a horse's mane, unwashed for days. That rich, rank smell of Mama's hair when it needed washing. You remember such smells, the sisters would say, some of them not so nice smells, all your life. The smell in their parents' forbidden room of, was it talcum powder, sweaty armpits, a sourish, sweet fragrance of bedclothes that, no matter how frequently laundered with detergent and bleach, were never truly fresh. A smell of bodies, adult bodies, yeasty, stale. Papa's tobacco. He rolled his own crude paper cigarettes. He chewed tobacco in a thick, tarry black wad. And Papa's hair oil, that special smell of Papa's shoes, the black Sunday shoes always kept polished. His work boots, etc., he kept downstairs in the closed-in porch by the rear door called the entry. In a step-in closet close by the bed, behind an unhemmed length of chintz, was a blue-speckled porcelain chamber pot with a detachable lid and a rim that curled neatly under it like a lip. The sisters had their own chamber pot, their potty, as it was called. There was no indoor plumbing in John Niesenbaum's farmhouse, as in any farmhouse in the Chautauqua Valley well into the 1930s, in poorer homes well into the 1940s, and even beyond. 100 yards behind the house, beyond the silo, was the outhouse, the latrine, the privy. But you would not want to make that trip in cold weather, or in rain, or in the pitch black of night, not if you could help it. Of course, the smell of urine and a fainter smell of excrement must have been everywhere, the sisters conceded years later. As adults, reminiscing. It was masked by the barnyard smell, probably. Nothing worse than pig manure, after all. At least, we weren't pigs. Anyway, there was Mama on the bed that was so high from the floor you had to raise a knee to slide up on it, grab onto whatever you could, and the horsehair mattress, so hard and ungiving, the cloth over Mama's eyes that she hadn't moved, and beside Mama, in the rump of bedclothes, her Bible, face down, pages bent. That Bible her mother-in-law, Grandma Niesenbaum, had given her for a wedding present, since she hadn't had one of her own. It was smaller than the heavy black family Bible. It was made of limp ivory leather covers and had onion skin pages the girls were allowed to examine, but not to turn without Mama's supervision. The Bible that would disappear with Gretel Niesenbaum forever. The girls begged, whimpered, Mama, are you sick?" At first there was no answer, just Mama's breath coming quick and hard and uneven, her olive pale skin oily with heat like fever. Her legs were tangled in the afghan. Her hair was strewn across the pillow. They saw the glint of Mama's gold cross and a thin gold chain around her neck, almost lost in her hair. Not only a cross, but a locket, too. When Mama opened it, there was inside a tiny strand of silver hair once belonging to a woman the sisters had never known. Mama's own grandmother she'd loved so when she was a little girl. And there were Mama's breasts, almost exposed, heavy, lush, beautiful, almost spilling out of a white eyelet slip, rounded like sacks holding warm liquid, nipples dark and big as eyes. You weren't supposed to stare at any part of a person's body, but how could you help it? Especially Connie, who was fascinated by such, guessing how one day she'd inhabit a body like Mama's. Years ago, she peeked at her mother's big milk-swollen breast when Nelia was still nursing, jealous, awed. Nelia was now 5 years old, could not herself recall nursing at all, come one day to believe, stubborn and disdainful, that she had never nursed, had only been bottle-fed. At last, Mama snatched the cloth off her face. You, damn you, what do you want? She stared at the girls as if clutching hands and gaping at her they were strangers. Her right eye was bruised and swollen. There were raw red marks on her forehead. First Nelia, then Connie began to cry, and Mama said, Constance, why aren't you in school? Why can't you leave me alone? God help me. Always Mama, Mama, Mama. Connie whimpered. Mama, did you hurt yourself? Nelia moaned, stuck in a corner of the Afghan like a deranged baby, and Mama ignored the question. As Mama often ignored questions she thought nosy. None of your business. Her hand lifted as if she meant to slap them, but then fell wearily, as if this had happened more times before, this exchange, this emotion. It was her faith that it would happen many times again. A close, sweet, stale blood odor lifted from Mama's lower body, out of the folds of the soiled Afghan. That odor neither of the little girls could have identified except in retrospect, in adolescence, at last detecting it in themselves, shamed, discomforted, the secret of their bodies of what was called, invariably in embarrassed undertones, that certain time of the month. So, Gretel Niesenbaum, at the time she disappeared from her husband's house, was having her period. Did that mean something or nothing? Nothing, Cornelia would say sharply. Yes, Constance would insist. It meant her mother was not pregnant. She wasn't running away with any lover because of that. That morning, what confusion in the Niesenbaum household. However, the sisters would later speak of the encounter in the big bedroom, what their mother had said to them, how she had looked and behaved. It had not been precisely that way, of course, because how can you speak of confusion? Where are the words for it? How to express in adult language the wild fibrillation of children's minds, two child minds beating against each other like moths. How to know what had truly happened, what was only imagined. Connie would swear that their mother's eye looked like a nasty, dark-rotted egg, so swollen. But she could not say which eye it was, right or left. Nelia, shrinking from looking at her mother's bruised face, wanting only to burrow against her, to hide and be comforted, would come in time to doubt that she'd seen a hurt eye at all, or whether she'd been led to believe she saw it because Connie, who was so bossy, claimed she had. Connie would remember their mother's words, Mama's rising, desperate voice. Don't touch me. I'm afraid. I might be going somewhere, but I'm not ready. God, I'm so afraid. And on, saying she was going away. She was afraid. Connie trying to ask where. Where was she going? And Mama beating at the bedclothes with her fists. Nelia would remember being hurt at the way Mama yanked the spittle-soaked corner of the Afghan out of her mouth so roughly. Not Mama, but bad Mama. Witch Mama, who scared her. But then Mama relented, exasperated. Oh, come on, you damn little babies. Of course Mama loves you. Eager then as starving kittens, the sisters scrambled up onto the high, hard bed, whimpering, snuggling into Mama's arms, her damp, snarled hair, those breasts, Connie and Nelia burrowing, crying themselves to sleep like nursing babies. Mama drew the Afghan over the three of them as if to shield them. That morning of April 11, 1923. And next morning, early before dawn, the sisters would be awakened by their father's shouts. Gretel? Gretel! 2. Never spoke of her after the first few weeks, after the first shock. We learned to pray for her and forgive her and to forget her. We didn't miss her. So Mother said in her calm, judicious voice, the voice that held no blame. But Aunt Connie would take me aside, the older, wiser sister. It's true, we never spoke of Mama when any grown-ups were near. That was forbidden. But God, we missed her every hour of every day, all the time we lived on that farm. I was Cornelia's daughter. It was Aunt Connie I trusted. No one in the Chautauqua Valley knew where John Niesenbaum's young wife Gretel had fled, but all knew, or had an opinion of, why she'd gone. Faithless she was, a faithless woman. Had she not run away with a man, abandoned her children? She was 27 years old and too young for John Niesenbaum, and she wasn't a Ransomville girl. Her people lived 60 miles away in Chautauqua Falls. Here was a wife who'd committed adultery, was an adulteress. Some might say a tramp, a whore, a slut. Reverend Diekman, the Lutheran minister, would preach amazing sermons in her wake. For miles through the valley, and for years well into the 1940s, there would be scandalized talk of Gretel Niesenbaum, a woman who left her faithful Christian husband and her 2 little girls with no warning, no provocation, disappearing in the middle of the night, taking with her only a single suitcase, as every woman who ever spoke of the episode liked to say, licking her lips, the clothes on her back. Aunt Connie said she'd grown up imagining she'd actually seen her mother, as in a dream, walking stealthily up the long drive to the road, a bundle of clothes like laundry slung across her back. Children are so damned impressionable, Aunt Connie would say, laughing wryly. For a long time after their mother disappeared and no word came from her or of her, as far as the sisters knew, Connie couldn't seem to help herself, teasing Nelia, saying, "Mommy's coming home," for a birthday of Nelia's, or Christmas, or Easter. How many times Connie thrilled with wickedness, deceiving her baby sister, the silly baby that she was, Nelia believed. And how Connie would laugh at her. Well, it was funny, wasn't it? Another trick of Connie's, poking Nelia awake in the night when the wind was rattling the windows, moaning in the chimney like a trapped animal, saying excitedly, "Mama's outside the window, listen! Mama's a ghost trying to get you!" Sometimes Nelia screamed so Connie had to straddle her chest and press a pillow over her face to muffle her. If they'd wakened Papa with such nonsense, it'd sure been hell to pay. Once, I might have been 12, I asked if my grandfather had spanked or beaten them. Aunt Connie, sitting in our living room on the high-backed mauve brocade chair that was always hers when she came to visit, ignored me. Nor did Mother seem to hear. Aunt Connie lit one of her Chesterfields with a fussy flourish of her pink frosted nails, took a deep, satisfied puff, and said, as if it were a thought only now slipping into her head, like all such thoughts deserving of utterance, "I was noticing the other day on TV how bratish and idiotic children are. We're supposed to think they're cute. Papa wasn't the kind to tolerate children carrying on for a single minute." She paused, again inhaling deeply. "None of the men were back there." Mother nodded slowly, frowning. These conversations with my aunt seemed always to give her pain, an actual ache behind the eyes. If she could no more resist them than Aunt Connie, she said, wiping at her eyes, "Papa was a man of pride. After she left us as much as before." Aunt Connie made her high, humming nasal sound that meant she had something crucial to add, but did not want to appear pushy. "Well, maybe more, Nelia. More pride. After." She spoke insinuatingly, with a smile and a glance toward me. Like an actress who has strayed from her lines, Mother quickly amended, "Yes, of course, because a weaker man would have succumbed to shame and despair." Aunt Connie nodded briskly. "Might have cursed God. Turned to drink. So many of them did back there. But not Papa. He had the gift of faith." Aunt Connie nodded sagely, yet still with that strange, almost teasing smile. "Oh, indeed, Papa did. That was his gift to us, Nelia, wasn't it? His faith." Mother was smiling her tight-lipped smile, her gaze lowered. I knew that when Aunt Connie left, she would go upstairs to lie down. She would take 2 aspirin and draw the blinds, put a damp, cold cloth over her eyes, and lie down and try to sleep. Her softening, middle-aged face, the hue of putty, the young girl's face, shone rapt with fear. Oh, yes, his faith. Aunt Connie laughed heartily. Laugh, dimples nicking her cheeks and a wink in my direction. Years later, numbly sorting through Mother's belongings after her death, I would discover in a lavender-scented envelope in a bureau drawer a single strand of dry ash-colored hair. On the envelope, in faded purple ink, "Beloved Father John Allard Niesenbaum, 1872, 1957. 3. By his own account, John Niesenbaum, the wronged husband, had not had the slightest suspicion that his strong-willed young wife had been discontent, restless. Certainly not that she had a secret lover. So many local women would have dearly wished to change places with her. He'd been given to know when he was courting her. His male vanity and his Niesenbaum vanity, which you might call common sense, suggested otherwise. The Niesenbaums were a well-regarded family in the Chautauqua Valley. Among a lot of them, they must have owned thousands of acres of prime farmland. In the weeks, months, and eventually years that followed the scandalous departure, John Niesenbaum was by nature, like most of the male Niesenbaums, reticent to the point of arrogance and fiercely private, came to make his story, his side of it, known. As the sisters themselves gathered, for their father never spoke of their mother to them after the first several days following the shock, this was not a single coherent history, one that had to be pieced together like a giant quilt made of a myriad of fabric scraps. He did allow that Gretel had been missing her family, an older sister with whom she'd been especially close, and cousins and girlfriends she'd gone to high school with in Chautauqua Falls. He understood that the 200-acre farm was a lonely place for her. Their next-door neighbors miles away, the village of Ransomville, 7 miles. Trips beyond Ransomville were rare. He knew, or supposed he knew, his wife had harbored what his mother and sisters called wild imaginings, even after 9 years of marriage, farm life, and children. She'd asked several times to be allowed to play the organ at church, but had been refused. She reminisced, often wistfully, perhaps reproachfully, of long-ago visits to Port Oroscani, Buffalo, and Chicago, before she'd gotten married at the age of 18 to a man 14 years her senior. In Chicago, she'd seen stage plays and musicals, sensational dancers Irene and Vernon Castle in Irving Berlin's Watch Your Step. Wasn't just Gretel wanting to take over the organ at Sunday services and replacing the elderly male organist, whose playing, she said, sounded like a cat in heat. It was her general attitude toward Reverend Diekman and his wife. She resented having to invite them to an elaborate Sunday dinner every few weeks, as the Niesenbaums insisted. She allowed her eyes to roam the congregation during Diekman's sermons, and stifled yawns behind her gloved hand. She woke in the middle of the night, she said, wanting to argue about damnation, hell, the very concept of grace. To the minister's astonished face, she declared herself not able to fully accept the teachings of the Lutheran Church. If there were other more intimate issues between Gretel and John Niesenbaum, or another factor in Gretel's emotional life, of course, no one spoke of it at the time. Though it was hinted, possibly more than hinted, John Niesenbaum was disappointed with only daughters. Naturally, he wanted sons, to help him with the ceaseless work of the farm, sons to whom he could leave the considerable property, just as his married brothers had sons. What was generally known was John woke in the pitch-dark an hour before dawn of that April day to discover that Gretel was gone from their bed, gone from the house. He searched for her, called her name with growing alarm, disbelief. "Gretel! Gretel!" He looked at all the upstairs rooms of the house, including the bedroom where his sleep-dazed, frightened daughters were huddled together in their bed. He looked in all the downstairs rooms, in the damp, dirt-floored cellar into which he descended with a lantern. "Gretel, where are you?" Dawn came, dull, porous, and damp, with the coat yanked on in haste over his nightclothes and his bare feet jammed into rubber boots. He began a frantic yet methodical search of the farm's outbuildings, the privy, the cow barn, and the adjoining stable, the hay barn and the corn crib, where rats rustled at his approach. And none of these, save perhaps the privy, was it likely that Gretel might be found. Still, John continued his search with growing panic, not knowing what else to do. From the house, his now terrified daughters observed him moving from building to building, a tall, rigid, jerkily moving figure with hands cupped to his mouth, shouting, "Gretel! Gretel! Do you hear me? Where are you, Gretel?" The man's deep, raw voice, pulsing like a metronome, ringing, clear, profound, into his daughter's ears, so terrible as if the very sky had cracked open and God himself was shouting. What did such little girls, 8 and 5, know of God? In fact, his Aunt Connie would afterward recount quite a bit. There was Reverend Diekman's baritone impersonation of the God of the Old Testament, the expulsion from the garden, the devastating retort to Job, a spectacularly burning bush where fire itself cried, "Here I am." Such had already been imprinted irrevocably upon their imaginations. Only later that morning, but this was a confused, anguished account, did John discover that Gretel's suitcase was missing from the closet, and there were garments conspicuously missing from the clothes rack, and Gretel's bureau drawers had been hastily ransacked. Underwear, stockings were gone. Her favorite piece of jewelry, which she was childishly vain, were gone from her cedarwood box. Gone, too, her heirloom, faded cameo hairbrush, comb, and mirror set, and her Bible. What a joke! How people would chuckle over it. Gretel Niesenbaum taking her Bible with her, wherever in hell the woman went. Was there no farewell note after 9 years of marriage? John Niesenbaum claimed he'd looked everywhere and found nothing. Not a word of explanation, not a word of regret even to her little girls. For that alone we expelled her from our hearts. During the confused time while their father was searching and calling their mother's name, the sisters hugged each other, a state of numbness beyond shock, terror. Their father seemed at times to be rushing towards them with the eye-bulging blindness of a runaway horse. They hurried out of his path. He did not see them except to order them out of his way, not to trouble him now. From the rear entry door, they watched as he hitched his team of horses to his buggy and set out, shuddering for Ransomville along the winter-rutted post road, leaving the girls behind, erasing them from his mind. As he would tell afterward in rueful self-disgust, with an air of an enlightened sinner, he'd actually believed he would overtake Gretel on the road, convinced she'd be there, hiking on the grassy shoulder, carrying her suitcase. Gretel was a wiry, nervous woman, stronger than she appeared, with no fear of physical exertion. A woman capable of anything. John Niesenbaum had the idea that Gretel had set out for Ransomville, 7 miles away, there to catch the mid-morning train to Chautauqua Falls, another 60 miles south. It was his confused belief that they must have had a disagreement, else Gretel would not have left. He did not recall any disagreement. In fact, she'd insisted upon visiting the Hausers, her family, despite his wishes. Was that it? She was lonely for them, or lonely for something. She was angry they hadn't visited Chautauqua Falls for Easter, hadn't seen her family since Christmas. Was that it? We were never enough for her. Why were we never enough for her? But in Ransomville, in the cinder-block Chautauqua and Buffalo Depot, there was no sign of Gretel, nor had the lonely clerk seen her. This woman would be about my height, John Niesenbaum said, in his formal, slightly haughty way. She'd be carrying a suitcase. Her feet would maybe be muddy, her boots. The clerk shook his head slowly. No, sir, nobody looking like that. A woman by herself, a hesitation, a look of pain. Good-looking woman, young, kind of a way about her, a way of another pause, making itself known. Sorry, the clerk said. The 8:20 just came through and no woman bought a ticket. It happened then that John Niesenbaum was observed, stark-eyed, stiff, springy black hair and tufts like quills for the better part of that morning. April 12, 1923, wandering up one side of Ransomville's single main street and down the other, hatless, in farm overalls and boots, wearing a suit coat, somber gunmetal gray of good wool, buttoned crooked across his narrow muscular torso, disheveled and ravaged with the grief of a betrayed husband, too raw at this time for manly pride to intervene, pathetic, some said, as a kicked dog, yet eager, too. Eager as a puppy, he made inquiries at Meldrum's Dry Goods, at Elkin & Sons Grocers, at the First Niagara Trust, at the law offices of Roe and Niesenbaum, this Niesenbaum a young cousin of John's, even in the Five and Dime where the salesgirls would giggle in his wake. He wandered at last into the Ransomville Hotel, into the gloomy public room where the proprietor's wife was sweeping sawdust-strewn floorboards. Sorry, sir, we don't open until noon, the woman said, thinking he was a drunk, dazed and swaying like on his feet. Then she looked more closely at him, not knowing his first name, for John Niesenbaum was not used to patronizing local taverns, but recognizing his features. For it was said that male Niesenbaums were either born looking alike or came in time to look alike. Mr. Niesenbaum, is something wrong? In a beat of stymied silence, Niesenbaum blinked at her, trying to smile, groping for a hat to remove, but finding none, murmuring, No, ma'am, I'm sure not. It's a misunderstanding, I believe. I'm supposed to meet Mrs. Niesenbaum somewhere here, my wife. Shortly after Gretel Niesenbaum's disappearance, there emerged from numerous sources, from all points of the compass, certain tales of the woman. How rude she'd been, more than once, to the Diekmans. to many in the Lutheran congregation. A bad wife, unnatural mother. It was said she'd left her husband and children in the past, running back to her family in Chautauqua Falls, or was it Port Oroscani, and poor John Niesenbaum having to fetch her home again. This was untrue, though in time, even to Constance and Cornelia, it would seem to be true. As an elderly woman, Cornelia would swear she remembered both times her mother ran off. A shameless hussy, a tramp who had an eye for men, had the hots for men, anything in pants. Or she stuck up, snobby, marrying into the Niesenbaum family, a man almost old enough to be her father, no mystery there. Worse yet, she could be sharp-tongued, profane, heard to utter such words as damn, goddamn, hell, yes, and horseballs, bullshit. Standing with her hands on her hips, fixing her eyes on you, that loud laugh, showing her teeth that were too big for her mouth. She was too smart for her own good, that's for sure. She was scheming, faithless. Everybody knew she flirted with her husband's hired hands. She did a hell of a lot more than flirt with them. Ask around. Sure, she had a boyfriend, a lover. Sure, she was an adulteress. Hadn't she run off with a man? She'd run off, and where was she to go? Where was a woman to go except run off with a man, whoever he was? In fact, he'd been sighted. A tower operator for the Chautauqua and Buffalo Railroad. Big red-headed guy living in Shaheen, 12 miles away. Or he was a carpet sweeper salesman. Squirrely little guy with a mustache and a smooth way of talking who passed through the valley every few months, but after April 12, 1923, was never seen there again. Another more attractive rumor was that Gretel Niesenbaum's lover was a 30-year-old naval officer stationed at Port Oroscani. He'd been transferred to a base in North Carolina, or was it Pensacola, Florida, and Gretel had no choice but run away with him. She loved him so, and 3 months pregnant with his child. There could have been no romance in the terrible possibility that Gretel Niesenbaum had fled on foot, alone, not to her family, simply to escape from her life. And what exigency of need, what despondency of spirit, no name might be given it by any who had not experienced it. But in any case, where had she gone? Where? Disappeared. Over the edge of the world. To Chicago, maybe. That army base in North Carolina. Or Florida. We forgave, we forgot. We didn't miss her. The things Gretel Niesenbaum left behind in the haste of her departure. Several dresses, hats, shabby cloth coat, rubberized galoshes and boots, undergarments, mended stockings, knitted gloves. In the parlor of John Niesenbaum's house, in cut glass vases, bright yellow daffodils she'd made from crepe paper, hand-painted fans, teacups, books she brought with her from home, a golden treasury of verse, Mark Twain, Joan of Arc, Fitzgerald's This Side of Paradise, missing its jacket cover, tattered programs for musical shows, stacks of popular piano music from the days Gretel had played in her childhood home. There was no piano in Niesenbaum's house. Niesenbaum had no interest in music. These meager items and some others Niesenbaum unceremoniously dumped into cardboard boxes 15 days after Gretel disappeared, taking them to the Lutheran Church for the Needy Fund, without inquiring if the Hausers might have wanted anything, whether his daughters might have wished to be given some mementos of their mother. Spite? Not John Niesenbaum, who was a proud man, even in his public humiliation. It was the Lord's work he was thinking of, not mere human vanity at all. That spring and summer, Reverend Diekman gave a series of grim, threatening, passionate sermons from the pulpit of the First Lutheran Church of Ransomville. It was obvious why, what the subject of the sermons was. The congregation was thrilled. Reverend Diekman, whom Connie and Nelia feared as much for his fierce smile as his stern, glowering expression, was a short, bulky man with a dull-gleaming dome of a head, eyes like ice water. Years later, when they saw a photograph of him, inches shorter than his wife, they laughed in nervous astonishment. Was that the man who intimidated them so? Before whom even John Niesenbaum stood grave and down-gazing? Yet, that ringing, vibrating voice of the God of Moses, the God of the Old Testament, could not shut out of consciousness even hours, days later, years later, pressing your hands against your ears and shutting your eyes tight. Tight. Unto the woman, he said, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and make thy conception. In sorrow shalt thou bring forth children, and thy desire shall be to thy husband, he shall rule over thee. Unto Adam, he said, because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife, and hast eaten of the tree, which I commanded thee, saying, Thou shalt not eat of it. Cursed is the ground for thy sake, in sorrow shalt thou eat of it all the days of thy life. Thorns also and thistles shall it bring forth to thee. Thou shalt eat the herb of the field. The sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread, till thou return to the ground. For out of it thou wast taken. For dust thou art, and to dust shalt thou return. Reverend Diekman paused to catch breath like a man running uphill. Greasy patches gleamed on his solid face like coins. Slowly his ice eyes searched the rows of worshippers, till as if by chance they came to rest on the upturned yet cowering faces of John Niesenbaum's daughters, who sat in the family pew directly in front of the pulpit in the fifth row, between their rigid-backed father in his clothes somber as mourning, and their grandmother Niesenbaum, also in clothes somber as mourning, though badly round-shouldered, with a perceptible hump. The cheerless, dutiful grandmother who come to live with them now that their mother was gone. Their other grandparents, the Hausers, who lived in Chautauqua Falls and whom they'd loved, the sisters would never see again. It was forbidden even to speak of these people, Gretel's people. The Hausers were to blame somehow for Gretel's desertion, though they would always claim, they knew nothing of what she'd done, in fact feared something had happened to her. The Hausers were a forbidden subject. Only after Constance and Cornelia were grown, no longer living in their father's house, did they see their Hauser cousins. But still, as Cornelia confessed, she felt guilty about it. Father would have been so hurt and furious if he'd known. Consorting with the enemy, he would deem it betrayal. In Sunday school, Mrs. Diekman took special pains with little Constance and little Cornelia. They were regarded with misty-eyed pity, like child lepers. Fattish little Constance, prone to fits of giggling, and hollow-eyed little Cornelia, prone to sniffles and melancholy. Both girls had chaste, reddened faces and hands because their grandmother Niesenbaum scrubbed them so with strong gray soap, never less than twice a day. Cornelia's dun-colored hair was strangely thin. When the other children trooped out of the Sunday school room, Mrs. Diekman kept the sisters behind to pray with them. She was very concerned about them, she said. She and Reverend Diekman prayed for them constantly. Had their mother contacted them since leaving? Had there been any hint of what their mother was planning to do? Any strangers visiting the farm? Any unusual incidents? The sisters stared blankly at Mrs. Diekman. She frowned at their ignorance, or its semblance, dabbed at her watery eyes, and sighed as if the world's weight had settled on her shoulders. She said, half chiding, You should know, children, it's for a reason that your mother left you. It's God's will, God's plan. He is testing you, children. You are special in his eyes. Many of us have been special in his eyes and have emerged stronger for it, and not weaker. There was a breathy pause. The sisters were invited to contemplate how Mrs. Diekman, with her soft, wattled face, her stout, corseted body, and fattish legs, encased in opaque support hose, was a stronger, not a weaker person by God's special plan. You will learn to be stronger than girls with mothers, Constance and Cornelia. These words, girls with mothers, enunciated oddly, contemptuously. You are already learning. Feel God's strength coursing through you. Mrs. Diekman seized the girl's hands, squeezing so quick and hard that Connie burst into frightened giggles, nearly shrieked as if she'd been burned, and almost wet her panties. Nelia acquired pride then. Instead of being ashamed, publicly humiliated, at the one-room county schoolhouse, for instance, where certain of the other children were ruthless, she could be proud, like her father. God had a special feeling for me. God cared about me. Jesus Christ, his only Son, was cruelly tested too, and exalted. You can bear any hurt and degradation, thistles and thorns, the flaming sword, the cherubim guarding the garden. Mere girls with mothers, how could they know? 4. Of course, Connie and Nelia had heard their parents quarreling in the weeks, months before their mother disappeared. In fact, all their lives. Had they been queried, had they had the language, they might have said, This is what is done. A man, a woman, isn't it? Connie, who was 3 years older than Nelia, knew much that Nelia would not ever know. Not words exactly. These quarrels, of a tone different from their father shouting out instructions to his farm hands. No words, but an eruption of voices, ringing through the floorboard if the quarrel came from downstairs, reverberating the window panes, where wind thinly whistled. In bed, Connie would hug Nelia tight, pretending Nelia was Mama, or Connie was herself Mama. If you shut your eyes tight enough, if you shut your ears. Always after the voices there came silence. If you wait. Once crouched at the foot of the stairs, it was Connie, or Nelia, gazing upward, astonished as Mama descended the stairs, swaying like a drunk woman, her left hand groping against the railing, face dead white, the bright crimson rosebud in the corner of her mouth glistening as she wiped furiously at it, and quick walking in that way of his that made the house vibrate, heavy-heeled behind her, descending from the top of the stairs, a man whose face she could not see, fiery and blinding, God in the burning bush, God in thunder. Bitch, get back up here. If I have to come get you, you won't be a woman, a wife. It was a fact the sisters learned young. If you wait long enough, run away and hide your eyes, shut your ears, there comes a silence, vast and rolling and empty as the sky. There was the mystery of the letters my mother and Aunt Connie would speak of, but never exactly discuss in my presence, into the last year of my mother's life. Which of them first noticed they couldn't agree. When it began exactly, no earlier than the fall 1923, it would happen that Papa went to fetch the mail, which he rarely did, then only on Saturdays. Returning along the quarter-mile lane, he would be observed, by accident, the girls weren't spying, with an open letter in his hand, reading, or was it a postcard, walking with uncharacteristic slowness, this man whose step was invariably brisk and impatient. Connie recalled he'd sometimes slip into the stable to continue reading. Papa had a liking for the stable, which was for him a private place, where he'd chew tobacco, spit into the hay, run his calloused hands along a horse's flanks, think his own thoughts. Other times, carrying whatever it was, letter, postcard, the rarity of an item of personal mail, he'd return to the kitchen and his place at the table. There the girls would find him, by accident. They were not spying, drinking coffee laced with top milk and sugar, rolling one of his clumsy cigarettes. And Connie would be the one to inquire, "Was there any mail, Papa?" keeping her voice low, unexcited. Papa would shrug and say, "Nothing." On the table where he dropped them indifferently might be a few bills, advertising flyers, the Chautauqua Valley Weekly Gazette. Nelia never inquired about the mail at such times because she would not have trusted her voice. But young as 10, Connie could be pushy, reckless. "Isn't there a letter, Papa?" "What is that, Papa, in your pocket?" Papa would say calmly, staring her full in the face, "When your father says nothing, girl, he means nothing." Sometimes his hand shook, fussing with the pouch of bugler and the stained cigarette roller. Since the shame of losing his wife, everybody knowing the circumstances, John Niesenbaum had aged shockingly. His face was creased, his skin reddened and cracked, finally stippled with what would be diagnosed, when finally he went to a doctor, as skin cancer. His eyes, pouched in wrinkled lids like a turtle's, were often vague, restless. Even in church, in a row close to Reverend Diekman's pulpit, he had a look of wandering off. What he called his earlier life, he'd been a rough, physical man, intelligent but quick-tempered. Now he tired easily, could not keep up with his hired men, whom he more and more mistrusted. His beard, once so trim and shapely, grew ragged and uneven, was entirely gray-grizzled like cobwebs, and his breath smelled of tobacco juice, wet, rank, sickish, rotted. Once, seeing the edge of the letter in Papa's pocket, Connie bit her lips and said, "It's from her, isn't it?" Papa said, still calmly, "I said it's nothing, girl, from nobody." Never in their father's presence did either of the sisters allude to their missing mother, except as her, she. Later, when they searched for the letter, even for its envelope, of course they found nothing. Papa had burned it in the stove, probably, or torn it into shreds, tossed into the garbage. Still the sisters risked their father's wrath by daring to look in his bedroom, the stale-smelling room he had moved to downstairs at the rear of the house when he was out. Even desperate, knowing it was hopeless, poking through fresh-dumped garbage. Like all farm families of their day, the Niesenbaums dumped raw garbage down a hillside in the area of the outhouse. Once Connie scrambled across fly-buzzing mounds of garbage holding her nose, stooping to snatch up what? A card advertising a fertilizer sale that looked like a picture postcard. "Are you crazy?" Amelia cried. "I hate you." Connie turned to scream at her, eyes brimming tears. "Go to hell, horse's ass! I hate you!" Both wanted to believe, or did in fact believe, that their mother was not writing to their father but to them. But they would never know. For years, as the letters came at long intervals, arriving only when their father fetched the mail, they would not know. This might have been a further element of mystery, why the letters, arriving so infrequently, arrived only when their father got the mail, why when Connie or Nelia or Lorraine, John's younger sister, would come to live with them, got the mail. It would never be one of the mysterious letters, only when Papa got the mail. After my mother's death in 1981, when I spoke more openly to my Aunt Connie, I asked why they hadn't been suspicious, just a little. Aunt Connie lifted her penciled eyebrows, blinked at me as if I'd uttered something obscene. "Suspicious? Why?" Not once did the girls, who were in fact intelligent girls, nearly a straight-A student in the high school in town, calculate the odds, how the presumed letter from their mother could possibly arrive only on those days, Saturdays, when their father got the mail. One day out of 6 mail days, yet never any day except that particular day, Saturday. But as Aunt Connie said, shrugging, it just seemed that was how it was. They would never have conceived of even the possibility of any situation which the odds wouldn't have been against them in favor of Papa. 5. The farmhouse was already old when I first brought to visit it, summers in the 1950s. Part red brick so weathered as to seem without color, and part rotted wood, with a steep shingled roof, high ceilings, and spooky corners. Perpetual odor of wood smoke, kerosene, mildew, time. Perpetual draft passed through the house from the rear, which faced north, opening out along a long incline of acres, miles, dropping to the Chautauqua River 10 miles away like an aerial scene in a movie. I remember the old washroom, a machine with a hand wringer, a door to the cellar in the floor of that room, with a thick metal ring as a handle. Outside the house, too, was another door, horizontal and not vertical. The thought of what lay beyond those doors, the dark, stone-smelling cellar where rats scurried, filled me with a childish terror. I remember Grandfather Niesenbaum was always old, a lean, sinewy, virtually mute old man. His finely cracked, Venus-glazed skin, red-stained as if with earth, narrow, roomy eyes whose pupils seemed like the pupils of goats, horizontal black slats. How they scared me. Deafness had made Grandfather remote and strangely imperial, like an old, almost forgotten king. The crown of his head was shawnily bald, and a fringe of coarse hair, bleached to the color of ash, grew at the sides and back. For once my mother lamented he'd been careful in his dress, especially on Sundays, for church-going. He now wore filth-stained overalls, and in all months save summer, long, gray flannel underwear, straggling at his cuffs like a loose second skin. His breath stank of tobacco juice and rotted teeth. The knuckles of both his hands were grotesquely swollen. My heart beat quickly and erratically in his presence. "Don't be silly," Mother whispered nervously, pushing me toward the old man. "Your grandfather loves you." But I knew he did not. Never did he call me by my name, Bethany, but only girl, as if he hadn't troubled to learn my name. When Mother showed me photographs of the man she called Papa, some of these scissored in half to excise my missing grandmother, I stared and could not believe he'd once been so handsome, like a film actor of some bygone time. "You see," Mother said, incensed, as if the two of us had been quarreling, "this is who John Niesenbaum really is." I grew up never really knowing Grandfather. I certainly didn't love him. He was never Grandpa to me. Visits to Ransomville were sporadic, sometimes canceled at the last minute. Mother would be excited, hopeful, apprehensive. Then who knows why, the visit would be canceled. She'd be tearful, upset, yet relieved. Now I can guess that Mother and her family weren't fully welcomed by my grandfather. He was a lonely and embittered old man, but still proud. He'd never forgiven her for leaving home after high school, just like her sister Connie, going to the teacher's college at Elmira instead of marrying a local man worthy of working and eventually inheriting the Niesenbaum farm. By the time I was born in 1951, the acreage was being sold off. By the time Grandfather Niesenbaum died in 1972 in a nursing home in Uville, 200 acres had been reduced to a humiliating 7 acres, now the property of strangers. In the hilly cemetery, behind the First Lutheran Church of Ransomville, New York, there's a still shiny black granite marker at the edge of rows of Niesenbaum markers. John Allard Niesenbaum, 1872-1957. Chiseled into the stone is, "How long shall I be with you? How long shall I suffer you?" Such angry words of Jesus Christ's. Wonder who had chosen them. Not Constance or Cornelia, surely. Must have been John Niesenbaum himself. Already as a girl of 11, 12, I was pushy and curious, asking my mother about my missing grandmother. "Look, Mother, for God's sakes, where did she go? Didn't anybody try to find her?" Mother's replies were vague, evasive, as if rehearsed. That sweet, resolute, stoic smile. Cheerful resignation. Christian forgiveness. For 35 years, she taught high school English in the Rochester public schools, especially after my father left us and she became a single, divorced woman. The manner came easily to her of brisk classroom authority, that pretense of the skilled teacher of weighing others' opinions thoughtfully before reiterating one's own. My father, an educational administrator, left us when I was 14 to remarry. I was furious, heartbroken, dazed. Why? How could he betray us? But Mother maintained her Christian fortitude, her air of subtly wounded pride. "This is what people will do, Bethany. Turn against you. Turn faithless. You might as well learn young." Yet I pushed, up to the very end of her life when Mother was so ill. You judge me harsh, heartless. People did. For God's sakes, I wanted to know. What happened to my grandmother Niesenbaum? Why did nobody seem to care that she'd gone away? Were the letters my mother and Connie swore their father received authentic? Or had he been playing a trick of some kind? And if it had been a trick, what was its purpose? Just tell me the truth for once, Mother. The truth about anything. I'm 44 years old. I still want to know. But Mother, the intrepid schoolteacher, the good Christian, was impenetrable, inscrutable as her papa, capable of summing up her entire childhood back there. That was how she and Aunt Connie spoke of Ransomville, their pasts, back there, by claiming that such hurts are God's will, God's plan for each of us, a test of our faith, a test of our inner strength. I said, disgusted, "What if you don't believe in God? What are you left with then?" And Mother said, matter-of-factly, "You're left with yourself, of course, your inner strength. Isn't that enough?" The final time we spoke of this, I lost patience. Must have pushed Mother too far. In a sharp, stinging voice I'd never heard from her before, she said, "Bethany, what do you want me to tell you? About my mother, my father? Do you imagine I ever knew them? Either of them? My mother left Connie and me when we were little girls. Left us with him. Wasn't that her choice? Her selfishness? Why should anyone have gone looking for her? She was trash. She was faithless. We learned to forgive and to forget. Your aunt tells you a different story, I know, but it's a lie. I was the one who was hurt. I was the youngest. Your heart can be broken only once. You'll learn. Our lives were busy like the lives of us grown women today, women who have to work, women who don't have time to moan and groan over their hurt feelings. You can't know how Connie and I worked on that farm and that house, like grown women when we were girls. Father tried to stop both of us going to school beyond 8th grade. Imagine. We had to walk 2 miles to get a ride with a neighbor to get to the high school in Ransomville. There weren't school buses in those days. Everything you've had, you've taken for granted and wanted more, but we weren't like that. We hadn't money for the right school clothes. All our textbooks were used. We went to high school. I was the only farm girl. That's exactly what I was known as, even by my teachers. in my class to take math, biology, physics, Latin. I was memorizing Latin declensions, milking cows at 5 in the morning, winter mornings. I was laughed at. Nelia Nissenbaum was laughable, but I accepted it. All that mattered was that I win a scholarship to a teacher's college so I could escape the country. And I did win a scholarship, and I never returned to Ransomville to live. Yes, I loved Papa. I still love him. I love the farm, too. You can't not love any place that's taken so much from you. But I had my own life. I had my teaching jobs. I had my faith, my belief in God. I had my destiny. I even got married. That was extra, unexpected. I've worked for everything I ever got. I never had time to look back, to feel sorry for myself. Why then should I think about her? Why do you torment me about her? A woman who abandoned me when I was 5 years old, in 1923. I made my peace with the past, just like Connie in her different way. We're happy women. We've been spared a lifetime of bitterness. That was God's gift to us. Mother paused, breathing quickly. There was in her face the elation of one who'd said too much, but can never be retracted. I was stunned into silence. She plunged on, now contemptuously. What are you always wanting me to admit, Bethany? Did you know something I don't know? What is your generation always pushing for from ours? Isn't it enough we gave birth to you, indulged you, must be sacrificed to you too? What do you want us to tell you? Life is cruel and purposeless. There is no love in God and never was, only accidents. Is that what you want to hear from your mother? That I married your father because he was a weak man, a man I couldn't feel much for, who wouldn't, when it came time, hurt me? And then there was silence. We stared at each other. Mother, in her glisten of fury, daughter Bethany so shocked she could not speak. Never again would I think of my mother in the old way. What mother never knew. In April, 2 years after her death, a creek that runs to the old Nissenbaum property flooded its banks. Several hundred feet of red clay soil collapsed overnight into the creek bed, as in an earthquake. In the raw, exposed earth, there was discovered a human skeleton, decades old but virtually intact. It had been apparently buried less than a mile behind the Nissenbaum farmhouse. There had never been anything so newsworthy, so sensational in the history of Chautauqua County. State forensic investigators determined that the skeleton had belonged to a woman, apparently killed by numerous blows to the head. A hammer or the blunt edge of an axe shattered her skull like a melon. Dumped into the grave with her was what appeared to have been a suitcase, now rotted. Its contents, clothes, shoes, underwear, gloves, scarcely recognizable from the earth surrounding it. There were a few pieces of jewelry. Still entwined around the skeleton's neck, a tarnished gold cross on a chain. Most of the women's clothing had long ago rotted away. Almost unrecognizable, too, was a book, a leather-bound Bible, close beside her. About the partly detached, fragile wrist and ankle bones were loops of rusting baling wire that had fallen loose, coiled in the moist red clay like miniature sleeping snakes.